Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor, their light catching the sequins on evening gowns and the gleam of champagne flutes raised in charitable toasts. Ethan Caldwell adjusted his black tie for the third time that evening, his eyes scanning the crowd of San Francisco's elite gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Benefit Gala. At 26, he had attended dozens of these events, each one blending into the next in a parade of predictable conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes. But tonight felt different. He first noticed her across the room, standing beside a towering floral arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. She wasn't the most conventionally beautiful woman in the room. That honor belonged to the string of socialites draped in designer gowns worth more than most people's annual salaries. No, what stopped Ethan mid-conversation was something else entirely. While everyone else seemed to be performing their wealth, she stood with a natural grace that needed no embellishment. Nora wore a simple navy dress that hugged her curves modestly. Her dark hair swept into an elegant updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. But it was her eyes that captured him. Deep brown pools that seemed to hold entire conversations. Watching the crowd with an intelligence that made Ethan's chest tighten with unexpected longing. She was listening intently to an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair, leaning down to catch his words, her face animated with genuine interest. When he finished speaking, she threw back her head and laughed, not the practiced tinkle of society women, but a real laugh that rang clear and true across the noise of the ballroom. "Ethan, are you even listening?" His mother's sharp voice cut through his reverie. Evelyn Caldwell stood beside him in her signature pearls and disapproval, her lips pressed into the thin line that had become her permanent expression whenever discussing her son's romantic life. "I was saying that the Harrington girl would be perfect for you. Her father owns half of Napa Valley." "I'm sure she's lovely, Mother," Ethan replied absently, his attention still fixed on the woman by the flowers. The elderly gentleman had moved on, and now she stood alone, surveying the crowd with those remarkable eyes. "Ethan Caldwell, you listen to me?" His mother's grip on his arm was surprisingly strong for such a delicate-looking woman. "You're 26 years old. It's time you settle down with someone suitable, someone who understands our world, our obligations." Our obligations. Ethan had heard this speech countless times. As the eldest son of one of San Francisco's oldest families, he had obligations to marry well, produce heirs, and continue the Caldwell legacy. Love, his mother had always made clear, was a luxury that people like them couldn't afford. "Excuse me, Mother. I see someone I need to speak with." Before Evelyn could protest, Ethan was moving through the crowd, weaving between clusters of guests, with the kind of purposeful determination that had made him successful in business. As he drew closer, he could see that the woman's dress was indeed simple, probably off the rack rather than custom-made, but she wore it with such confidence that it looked more elegant than anything else in the room. "Excuse me," he said when he reached her side. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Ethan Caldwell." She turned to face him fully, and up close, her beauty was even more striking. Her skin had a warm, natural glow that spoke of time spent outdoors rather than in expensive spas. There was intelligence in her eyes, yes, but also something elsey, weariness, that suggested she knew exactly who he was and what his family represented. "Nora Quinn," she replied, extending a hand that was soft, but not manicured to perfection. "I know who you are, Mr. Caldwell. Your family's foundation sponsors the literacy program where I work." Her voice carried the slightest hint of an accent, something that suggested childhood struggles and a hard-won education. It was the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. "Please call me Ethan. And what exactly do you do for the literacy program?" "I teach adults to read," she said simply. "People who never had the chance to learn as children or who fell through the cracks somehow. It's rewarding work." There was no pretension in her words. No attempt to make her job sound more glamorous than it was. In a room full of people who inflated their volunteer work to sound like major philanthropy, her honesty was refreshing. "That must be challenging," Ethan said, "and incredibly important." "It is." She studied his face as if trying to determine whether his interest was genuine. Most people at these events like to write checks and feel good about themselves. Actually working with people who need help that's messier, more complicated. I imagine it is. Ethan found himself leaning closer, drawn by her directness. How did you get into that work? For a moment, something flickered across her fascia, shadow of old pain, quickly hidden. Personal experience, she said quietly. My mother couldn't read. I learned early how much that limits a person's world. The orchestra began playing a waltz, and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Ethan saw his opportunity. Would you like to dance? Nora hesitated, glancing around the ballroom as if suddenly remembering where she was. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mr. Caldwell. I don't exactly fit in with your crowd. Good, Ethan said, offering his arm. I'm tired of my crowd. Something in his tone must have convinced her because, after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand on his arm. Her touch sent electricity through his body, a feeling he'd never experienced with any of the suitable women his mother had paraded before him. On the dance floor, they moved together as if they'd been partners for years. Nora was light on her feet, following his lead while maintaining her own grace. This close, he could smell her perfume, something subtle and floral that suited her perfectly. You're full of surprises, he murmured as they swayed to the music. How so? Most people at these events can barely manage a box step. You dance like you've had lessons. She smiled, and the sight of it made his heart skip. Community center classes when I was young. My mother believed that every girl should know how to carry herself with dignity, no matter what life threw at her. Wise woman. She was. The shadow crossed her face again. She died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, and Ethan found himself studying her face, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes cast shadows in the chandelier light. He had the strangest feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Can I ask you something? Nora said suddenly. Anything. Why are you really here tonight? You don't seem like the typical charity gala type. Ethan considered the question seriously. Obligation, mostly. My family has expectations. He paused, then added with complete honesty, but I'm glad I came. Otherwise, I never would have met you. The music ended, but they remained standing close together, neither wanting to break the spell. Around them, other couples dispersed, but Ethan and Nora stayed frozen in their small pocket of the universe. Nora, I'd like to see you again, Ethan said quietly. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? She looked up at him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. Ethan, I don't think you understand what you're asking. We're from different worlds. Your family, your friends, they won't approve. I don't care what they approve of, he said fiercely. I care about you. For a long moment, she searched his face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she nodded slowly. All right. But somewhere quiet, where we can actually talk. I know just the place. As they exchanged phone numbers, Ethan caught sight of his mother across the room, her face a mask of barely contained horror, as she watched her son with this unknown woman. He could practically see the investigation. She was already planning the background checks and social scrutiny that would follow. Let her look, he thought. Let them all look. The next 6 months would be a revelation. Their dinner dates turned into long walks through Golden Gate Park, hours spent talking about everything and nothing. Ethan discovered that Nora had grown up in foster care after her mother's death, aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but determination and a fierce belief in education as the path to a better life. She had put herself through college, working 3 jobs, graduated summa cum laude, and immediately thrown herself into helping others who faced the same challenges she had overcome. She was passionate about social justice, well-read in literature and philosophy, and possessed a wisdom that came from real hardship rather than theoretical study. Ethan found himself falling deeper in love with each passing day. He loved how Nora challenged him intellectually, how she made him see the world through different eyes. He loved her fierce compassion for her students, the way she lit up when talking about their progress. He loved how she never asked him for anything material, never seemed impressed by his wealth or family name. Most of all, he loved how she made him want to be better than he was. Their first disagreement came when Ethan tried to buy her expensive gifts. I don't need diamonds, Ethan, she said firmly. I need to know that you see me as more than a charity case you're trying to rescue. He was initially hurt by the suggestion but came to understand her perspective. Nora didn't want to be transformed into something she wasn't. She wanted to be loved for exactly who she was. Their first kiss happened on a foggy evening as they walked along the beach. It was soft, tentative at first, then deeper, as they both realized this was something neither had experienced before, a connection that transcended physical attraction and touched something profound in both their souls. "I've never felt this way before," Ethan whispered against her lips. "Neither have I," she admitted. "It scares me." "It scares me too, but in the best possible way." As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. Ethan began spending less time at society events and more time in Nora's world, visiting her literacy center, meeting her students, seeing firsthand the difference education could make in people's lives. For the first time in his 26 years, Ethan Caldwell had found something worth fighting for. And on a crisp December evening, standing on a hilltop overlooking the city at sunset, he got down on one knee and offered her his grandmother's ringa, simple solitaire that had belonged to the only woman in his family who had ever truly understood love. "Nora Quinn," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you are my heart, my soul, my every dream I never dared to dream. Will you marry me?" Her yes was whispered through tears of joy. And when he slipped the ring onto her finger, Ethan knew that whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time in his 26 years, Ethan Caldwell had found something worth fighting for. Chapter 2. Storm Wedding. The morning of their wedding dawned gray and overcast, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen. Ethan stood before the mirror in the vestry of St. Mark's Cathedral, adjusting his white tie for the dozenth time, his hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos that had preceded this moment. The past 6 months of wedding planning had been a battlefield. What should have been the happiest time of their lives had become an endurance test of family politics, social pressure, and outright hostility. His mother, Evelyn Caldwell, had declared war the moment Ethan announced his engagement, launching a campaign of subtle sabotage and not-so-subtle threats that would have impressed a military strategist. "She's nobody, Ethan." "Nobody?" Evelyn had declared during their first confrontation about the wedding. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation? 300 years of Caldwell family legacy, and you want to throw it away for some charity worker." "I want to marry the woman I love," Ethan had replied firmly. "And her name is Nora." But Evelyn Caldwell had not built her position as San Francisco's premier society matriarch by accepting defeat gracefully. If she couldn't stop the wedding through emotional manipulation, she would try other methods. The guest list became the first casualty. One by one, longtime family friends began declining their invitations with polite but firm excuses. Business associates suddenly found themselves unavailable. Even the society photographers who had covered every Caldwell family event for decades mysteriously developed scheduling conflicts. "It's remarkable," Nora had said quietly one evening, as they reviewed the growing pile of regrets. "It's like watching an entire social system organize itself against us." "Are you having second thoughts?" Ethan had asked, though the question terrified him. "About marrying you?" "Never." Her voice had been strong, certain. "About the cost you're paying for it? Every day." That was the burden Nora carried that Ethan couldn't fully understand. She loved him completely, but she also saw clearly what the union was costing him. Family relationships, business connections, social standing, everything he had been raised to value was being stripped away because of her. The venue had been another battle. St. Mark's Cathedral, where Caldwell men had been married for generations, had suddenly developed scheduling issues with their chosen date. It had taken his grandfather's intervention and a substantial donation to secure the booking. Even Father Sullivan, who had known Ethan since childhood, had expressed reservations. "Are you certain about this, my son? Marriage is a sacred commitment, not to be entered into lightly." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Father." The priest had studied him carefully. "And the differences between you and Miss Quinn, the social disparities?" "Love conquers all differences, Father. Isn't that what the Bible teaches?" Father Sullivan had nodded slowly. "Indeed, it does." "Very well, then, we shall trust in God's plan." Now, as Ethan waited in the vestry, he could hear the murmur of voices from the cathedral beyond. The guest list might be smaller than originally planned, but those who had come were people who truly mattered, friends who valued character over pedigree, colleagues who respected authentic emotion over social convenience. His best man, Lucas Bennett, burst through the vestry door with barely contained excitement. "Ethan, you need to see her. She's absolutely radiant." Lucas was one of the few people from Ethan's social circle who had embraced Nora immediately. A successful lawyer with his own reasons for distrusting society's superficial values, he had become both friend and ally during the difficult months of preparation. "How's the crowd?" Ethan asked. "Smaller than expected, but the ones who came are here for the right reasons. Your mother arrived 20 minutes ago." Ethan's stomach tightened. "How did she look?" Lucas hesitated. "Angry. And she's wearing black." "Black?" Ethan's blood ran cold. Black was the color of mourning, of funerals. His mother was attending his wedding, dressed as if someone had died. "Ethan," Lucas said carefully, "maybe we should prepare for—" "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "Whatever she's planning, we're not changing anything. Nora deserves her perfect wedding day, and she's going to get it." The organ began playing the processional, and Ethan's heart leapt. Soon he would see Nora walking toward him, and nothing else would matter. They took their positions at the altar, and Ethan's breath caught as the great doors of the cathedral opened. Nora appeared like a vision, her wedding dress simple but elegant, flowing behind her like liquid silk. She had no father to give her away. He had died when she was 12, so she walked alone, chin held high, eyes fixed on Ethan's face with unwavering love and determination. She was breathtaking. The dress, which she had chosen herself despite Evelyn's attempts to force her into something more suitable, was perfect for her. Classic, understated, highlighting her natural beauty rather than overwhelming it. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant updo, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She wore his grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of Caldwell family jewelry Evelyn hadn't been able to hide away. As she walked down the aisle, Ethan saw heads turning, heard the soft murmurs of appreciation from their guests. Even those who had initially questioned his choice could see the radiance, the dignity, the quiet strength that had captured his heart. When she reached the altar, Nora handed her simple bouquet of white roses to her matron of honor, Grace Liu, who had become like a sister to her during their friendship. Then she turned to face Ethan, and when their eyes met, the rest of the world fell away. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," she whispered back. And despite everything, they both smiled. Father Sullivan cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God to witness the union of Ethan James Caldwell and Nora Elizabeth Quinn in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over them, creating a sacred space that felt separate from all the conflict and controversy. For these moments, there was only love, only commitment, only the future they would build together. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Father Sullivan continued, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Ethan found himself thinking of his grandparents, who had shared 57 years of marriage until his grandmother's death 2 years ago. They had understood something his parents' generation seemed to have forgotten: that love was not a luxury, but a necessity. Not a weakness, but the greatest strength two people could share. The ceremony proceeded smoothly through the traditional vows, the exchange of rings, the prayers and blessings. Ethan's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love Nora in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death parted them. Nora's voice was equally strong, equally certain, as she made the same promises to him. When she slipped the gold band onto his finger, her hands were steady, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. They were nearly through the ceremony when Father Sullivan reached the traditional moment. "If anyone here present knows of any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Ethan squeezed Nora's hands reassuringly, knowing this moment would pass, and they would be husband and wife. Then, from the back of the cathedral came the sharp click of heels on marble. Every head turned as Evelyn Caldwell rose from her pew. She was indeed dressed entirely in black, not the elegant black of formal wear, but the stark, unforgiving black of mourning. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a line of grim determination. She looked like a figure from a Greek tragedy, come to pronounce doom upon the proceedings. "I object," she said clearly, her voice carrying easily through the hushed cathedral. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Ethan felt Nora's hands tremble in his, and his own heart began pounding with fury. He had expected his mother might cause a scene, but not a public humiliation designed to destroy the wedding day. "Mother, sit down," he said through gritted teeth. But Evelyn was not finished. She walked slowly down the aisle, her black dress rustling ominously, every step calculated for maximum dramatic effect. The sound of her heels echoed through the vaulted space like a countdown to disaster. "I object," she repeated when she reached the front of the cathedral, "because this woman cannot give my son what he needs. She comes from inferior stock, from a bloodline that cannot produce healthy heirs." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Ethan felt Nora's entire body go rigid beside him, saw the color drain from her face. Around them, wedding guests whispered and murmured, some in shock, others in cruel satisfaction at the drama unfolding. Evelyn wasn't finished. "My son deserves better than a barren woman who will never give him children. This marriage is a mistake that will destroy the Caldwell family legacy." For a moment, Ethan was so stunned by his mother's public cruelty that he couldn't speak. This went beyond family disapproval. This was character assassination performed before God and everyone they knew. Then he looked at Nora's face, saw the devastation there, and something inside him ignited. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. He released Nora's hands and turned to face his mother fully. "How dare you come into God's house and speak such poison?" "Ethan, I'm only thinking of your future." "No." His voice rose, filling the cathedral with a power that made several guests sit back in their pews. "You're thinking of your own pride, your own narrow view of what makes a person worthy. You know nothing about this woman, about her heart, her strength, her capacity for love." He turned back to Nora, taking her face gently in his hands. Her eyes were wide with shock and pain, but she stood straighter as he spoke. "You are not inferior stock," he said fiercely, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are not barren, and even if children never come to us, you are still the greatest gift God has ever given me. You are my completion, not my compromise." Tears were streaming down Nora's face, but she found her voice. "Ethan, I'm not finished." He turned back to face the congregation, his arm protectively around Nora's waist. "My mother stands there in mourning clothes because she thinks she's attending the death of her son. She's wrong. She's attending his birth." He looked directly at Evelyn Caldwell, his eyes burning with a fury, years in the making. "You have shown your true colors today, Mother. You have revealed yourself to be a woman so consumed with social standing that you would destroy your own son's happiness to preserve it. You are no longer welcome in my life or in our family." The cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs. Evelyn Caldwell's face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, it seemed as though she might refuse to leave. "Get out," Ethan said quietly. But his voice carried to every corner of the cathedral. For several heartbeats, mother and son stared at each other across a chasm that could never be bridged. Then, with what dignity she could muster, Evelyn Caldwell turned and walked back down the aisle. Her heels echoed loudly in the sudden silence, each step taking her further away from her son. The great doors of the cathedral closed behind her with a resounding boom. Father Sullivan cleared his throat nervously. "Well then, shall we continue?" Ethan looked down at Nora, whose tears had stopped flowing. Her chin was up again, her eyes bright with fierce love and determination. "Yes," she said clearly. "Let's continue." And so they did. When Father Sullivan pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with thunderous applause from the guests who remained people who had witnessed not just a wedding, but a declaration of war against hatred and prejudice. As they walked back down the aisle together, Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, they passed the empty pew where his family should have been sitting. But Ethan felt no sadness, only relief. He had chosen love over expectation, passion over tradition, truth over appearance. He had chosen Nora, and he would never regret it. Chapter 3. Honeymoon War. The cottage on Mendocino's rugged coast should have been paradise, perched on bluffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by towering redwoods and wild gardens. It offered the perfect escape from the chaos their wedding had become. Ethan had rented it for 2 weeks, envisioning lazy mornings in bed, long walks on the beach, and the sweet solitude of newlywed bliss. For the first 3 days, that's exactly what they had. They made love with the windows open, ocean breezes cooling their heated skin. The cottage felt like their own private world, isolated from the judgment and cruelty they had left behind in San Francisco. They cooked simple meals together in the tiny kitchen, feeding each other bites of fresh bread and local cheese, while the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I can't believe we're actually married," Nora said on their second evening, curled against Ethan's chest on the cottage's weathered deck. She wore one of his shirts, and nothing else, her hair loose and wild from their lovemaking. "Mrs. Caldwell," Ethan murmured, testing the sound of it. "I love how that sounds. Nora Caldwell." She smiled against his neck. "It has a nice ring to it." They talked for hours about their dreams, their plans, the life they would build together. Away from his family's poisonous influence, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. The confrontation at the cathedral had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in his life, he was free to be exactly who he wanted to be. "I want to expand the literacy program," Nora said one evening as they shared a bottle of wine under the stars. "Maybe start a foundation that helps adults get not just reading skills, but job training, life skills, real opportunities to change their lives." "We could do that," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "I have connections, access to funding. We could make a real difference." The word we felt magical on his tongue. After 26 years of singular existence, he was finally part of something bigger, something beautiful. On the 4th day, the first letter arrived. The cottage's elderly caretaker, Mrs. Thompson, brought it up from the mailbox with obvious reluctance. She was a weathered woman in her 70s who had been managing the property for decades, and she clearly sensed the tension the letter represented. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Caldwell, but this came marked urgent." The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with the Caldwell family crest embossed in the corner. Ethan's name was written in his mother's precise script, the same handwriting that had filled the margins of his childhood homework assignments and signed permission slips for school trips. "Just throw it away," he told Mrs. Thompson, not taking his eyes off the ocean. But Nora had seen the letter, and he could feel her tension beside him. The easy contentment of the morning evaporated like morning mist. "Maybe you should read it," she said quietly. "I don't need to read it to know what it says, Nora." She turned to face him fully, and he saw the shadow that had been haunting her since the wedding. Guilt, responsibility, the weight of being the cause of his family's estrangement. "These people raised you. They're your family. You're my family now." The words were meant to comfort, but he saw something flicker across her face. She felt guilty for coming between him and his family, even though the choice had been entirely his. Ethan took the letter from Mrs. Thompson and threw it into the kitchen trash without opening it. But the damage was done. The outside world had found them, had invaded their perfect sanctuary. More letters came over the following days, not just from his mother, but from his father, his siblings, family, friends, business associates. Mrs. Thompson delivered each one with increasing reluctance, and Ethan threw each one away without opening it. But the letters were just the beginning. On their 6th day, Ethan answered a knock at the door to find his brother Daniel standing on the cottage's front porch. At 24, Daniel had always been the golden child, the one who never questioned family expectations or challenged social conventions. He wore his privilege like armor, comfortable in his role as the perfect Caldwell son. "Hello, Ethan," Daniel said coolly. "Nice place, very rustic. What are you doing here, Dan? May I come in? I drove all the way from the city." Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped aside. Daniel entered the cottage with the air of a man inspecting inferior accommodations, his expensive suit and polished shoes incongruous in the simple space. Nora emerged from the bedroom, wearing a simple sundress, her hair still mussed from sleep. She looked beautiful and natural, but Ethan saw her stiffen when she saw Daniel. "Nora," Daniel said with a cold nod. "How lovely to see you again, Daniel." Her voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is." Daniel settled himself in one of the cottage's worn armchairs without being invited. "I'm here on behalf of the family." We need to talk. There's nothing to discuss, Ethan said firmly. Mother made her position clear at the wedding. Mother was emotional. She said things she didn't mean. She meant every word. Daniel sighed dramatically. Ethan, you're being childish. Yes, Mother handled things poorly, but she's your mother. She loves you. She has a funny way of showing it. Look, we all know this marriage was a mistake. Daniel's voice took on the patronizing tone that had irritated Ethan since childhood. But it's done now. The question is how we move forward. We? Nora spoke for the first time since the initial greeting, her voice dangerously quiet. The family, Daniel clarified, not looking at her directly. Ethan is still a Caldwell, regardless of his current situation. The dismissal in his tone was clear. Nora was not considered part of the family. She was merely Ethan's current situation, something temporary to be endured. Ethan felt his anger building. Careful, Dan. I'm trying to help you, Ethan. Father is prepared to forgive this entire episode if I'll just what? Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Come to your senses. This infatuation has gone far enough. You've made your point about independence or rebellion or whatever this is. Now it's time to think about your responsibilities. My responsibilities to the family, to the business, to your future children. Daniel glanced meaningfully at Nora. Real children with proper bloodlines. The silence that followed was deadly. Ethan saw Nora flinch as if she'd been slapped, saw her hand unconsciously move to her stomach. The family's cruel speculation about her fertility had found its mark. Get out, Ethan said quietly. Ethan, be reasonable. Get out. Ethan's roar shook the cottage windows. Get out before I throw you out. Daniel stood slowly, smoothing his suit. I'll tell Father you need more time to think. But Ethan, this can't go on forever. There are consequences to these choices. Is that a threat? It's reality. The business world is small, Ethan. Reputations matter. Connections matter. You can't survive on idealism alone. After Daniel left, the cottage felt poisoned. The peace they had built was shattered, replaced by a tension that infected every conversation, every silence, every moment of what should have been their most precious time together. He's right about one thing, Nora said that evening as they sat on the deck, the space between them feeling like a chasm. Reputations do matter in your world. My world is wherever you are. But for how long? The question held all her deepest fears. How long before you start resenting what you've given up for me? How long before you look at me and see everything you lost instead of everything you gained? Ethan turned to face her fully, seeing the vulnerability she was trying to hide. Never. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? She nodded, tears threatening. I see the woman who teaches people to read, not because she has to, but because she believes everyone deserves the power of words. I see someone who makes me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. I see my partner, my equal, my heart walking around outside my body. But your family chose their pride over their son. That's their loss, not ours. But doubt had crept in, and they both felt it. The letters kept coming, some pleading, some threatening, all designed to remind Ethan of what he was losing by choosing love over loyalty. His sister Abigail arrived on the 8th day, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She had always been the family peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained appearances. Ethan, please, she sobbed. Mother is having a breakdown. She hasn't eaten in days. Father is talking about changing his will. That's their choice. You're destroying our family. I'm protecting my family, Ethan replied, his arm around Nora. This is my family now. Abigail's face crumpled. What about us? What about 30 years of being your sister? The guilt was like a physical weight. These people had raised him, loved him in their own complicated way. But their love came with conditions, with expectations that would suffocate everything he had found with Nora. On the 10th day, his father arrived. Henry Caldwell was a formidable man, built like the linebacker he had been in college, now silver-haired and distinguished. He had built the family business from a modest inheritance into a financial empire, and he was not accustomed to being defied. Son, he said simply when Ethan opened the door. Father. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. Henry had aged in the weeks since the wedding, new lines around his eyes, his shoulders carrying the weight of family crisis. "Walk with me," Henry said. They walked down to the beach in silence, father and son, while Nora watched from the cottage window. The waves crashed against the rocks below, and seagulls wheeled overhead, crying like lost souls. "I built everything for you," Henry said finally. "The business, the reputation, the connections. Everything I worked for was meant to be your inheritance. I never asked for that burden. It's not a burden. It's a privilege. It's power." Henry stopped walking and faced his son. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" "I know exactly what I'm choosing. This girl, her name is Nora, and she's my wife." Henry's jaw tightened. "This woman has bewitched you somehow. She's made you forget who you are, what you owe to your family. She's made me remember who I want to be. And what about what you owe to me, to your mother, to the generations of Caldwells who built what you're so casually discarding?" The question hit home. Ethan did feel the weight of family obligation, the guilt of disappointing people who had sacrificed for him, but he also knew that their love was conditional, based on his compliance with their expectations. "I'm not discarding anything, Father. I'm choosing to build something new. With her. A woman who can't even give you children. We don't know that, don't we?" Henry's voice was cruel now. "Her family history is clear. Her mother struggled for years before managing one child. The chances of this woman giving you an heir are slim to none." The words were like poison, designed to plant seeds of doubt about their future. Ethan saw Nora watching from the cottage, saw the pain in her face even from this distance. "Children aren't everything, Father. They are everything. They are the future, the continuation of what we've built. Without children, what's the point of any of it?" Ethan thought of the students at Nora's literacy center, the adults she helped every day, who might not be his blood, but were becoming his chosen family. He thought of the foundation they planned to build, the lives they could touch together. "Love is the point," he said simply. "Love is always the point." Henry studied his son's face and seemed to see something there that convinced him argument was useless. "I'm changing my will," he said finally. "Daniel will inherit everything. You'll get nothing. I understand. The business connections, the social standing, the financial security, all of it will be gone. I understand. You'll be starting over with nothing. I'll be starting over with everything that matters." Henry turned and walked back toward the cottage, his shoulders bowed with defeat. At the door, he paused and looked back. "I hope she's worth it, son. I truly hope she's worth it." After his father left, Ethan found Nora sitting on the cottage steps, tears streaming down her face. "I heard," she said simply. He sat beside her and pulled her close. "It doesn't matter. Your inheritance, your family, your entire life, how can it not matter? Because I have you. Because we have each other. Because what we've built together is stronger than money or social standing or family expectations." But even as he said the words, Ethan felt the weight of what they had lost. The honeymoon was over in more ways than one. The real world had invaded their paradise. And now they would have to figure out how to build a life together in the face of overwhelming opposition. That night, they made love with desperate intensity, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all week finally broke, rain lashing the cottage windows like tears. When morning came, they began packing for the return to San Francisco to a life that would be entirely their own creation. They were leaving paradise, but they were also leaving childhood behind. The war for their love had begun, and they would fight it together. Chapter 4: The Apron Incident. 3 years had passed since the wedding. 3 years of building a life from nothing but love and determination. Ethan and Nora had created a fortress of happiness in their modest apartment in Pacific Heights, not the grand mansion Ethan could have inherited, but a warm, bright space that truly felt like home. Ethan had left the family business entirely, using his connections and business acumen to start a small investment firm that specialized in ethical companies and social impact ventures. It was challenging work with smaller profits than he could have made in traditional finance, but it allowed him to sleep peacefully at night. Knowing his success came from building up rather than exploiting. Nora had expanded her literacy program into a full nonprofit organization, securing grants and donations to help hundreds of adults achieve their educational dreams. Their apartment's second bedroom had been converted into a home office where she worked late into the night, writing proposals and planning curricula. They had been happy genuinely, deeply happy in a way that neither had imagined possible. The family's rejection still hurt, especially during holidays when they celebrated alone. But they had built their own traditions, their own support network of friends who valued authenticity over social standing. But they had also learned that love, no matter how strong, couldn't completely shield them from the outside world. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a courier who seemed almost apologetic to be interrupting their peaceful breakfast. The cream-colored envelope bore the familiar Caldwell family crest, and Nora's hand trembled slightly as she handed it to Ethan. "It's from Daniel," Ethan said after scanning the contents. "Isabel is pregnant. They're having a baby shower." Isabel, Daniel's wife of 2 years, was everything the family had wanted Ethan to marry. Beautiful, wealthy, socially connected, and most importantly, fertile. Unlike the rest of the Caldwell family, Isabel had always treated Nora with courtesy, even kindness. During their few previous encounters, she had given birth to their first child, Oliver, just 10 months after their wedding. And now, barely 2 years later, she was pregnant again. "That's wonderful for them," Nora said carefully. But Ethan heard the pain underneath her words. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of hoping, and Nora's womb remained empty. They had seen doctors, specialists, undergone tests that revealed nothing definitively wrong, but offered no guarantees. The family's cruel predictions about her barrenness echoed in the silence between them, an unspoken fear that grew stronger with each passing month. "We don't have to go," Ethan said quickly. "Yes, we do." Nora's voice was firm. "She's carrying your nephew or niece. This is family." They made their position on family very clear. That was 2 years ago. Maybe it's time to try again. Ethan studied his wife's face, seeing the hope she was trying to hide. Despite everything, Nora still believed in reconciliation, still hoped that love could heal the wounds that had been inflicted. "Nora, they invited us because Isabel insisted. She's the only one in that family who's ever shown you any kindness. This could be a trapper, it could be a bridge." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, I'm tired of living in exile. I'm tired of watching you pretend it doesn't hurt that your nephew doesn't know you exist. Maybe this is our chance to find some kind of peace." Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. The baby shower was held at the Caldwell family estate in Pacific Heights, the grand mansion where Ethan had grown up but hadn't set foot in since their wedding day. As their taxi pulled up the circular drive, Ethan felt his chest tighten with a mixture of nostalgia and dread. The house looked exactly the same. Imposing stone facade, manicured gardens, the kind of old-money elegance that spoke of generations of wealth and privilege. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum of his former life. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly, and Ethan realized this was her first time seeing the place where he had been raised. "It's a mausoleum," he replied. They were greeted at the door by Jenkins, the elderly butler who had served the family for 40 years. His face lit up when he saw Ethan. "Master Ethan, how wonderful to see you." "Hello, Jenkins. This is my wife, Nora Mrs. Caldwell." Jenkins bowed formally to Nora, his manner warm despite the obvious tension in the house. "It's an honor to finally meet you." They were led through the familiar halls to the garden terrace, where the baby shower was in full swing. The scene was exactly what Ethan had expected. San Francisco society, women in pastel dresses, crystal glasses of champagne, an elaborate display of gifts wrapped in pink and blue. Isabel spotted them first. She was radiant in her pregnancy, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her designer maternity dress emphasizing her blossoming figure. Her face brightened genuinely when she saw them. "Ethan, Nora, I'm so glad you came." She embraced them both warmly, and Ethan remembered why he had always liked his sister-in-law. Isabel had been raised in the same social circles, but she possessed a natural kindness that set her apart. "Congratulations," Nora said sincerely. "You look absolutely radiant." "Thank you. I feel wonderful this time, much better than with Oliver." Isabel paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry it's been so long. I've missed you both." The conversation was interrupted by an awkward silence that fell over the party. Ethan looked up to see his mother approaching, her face a mask of polite coolness. Evelyn Caldwell wore a pale blue dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Her jewelry understated but unmistakably expensive. "Ethan," she said with a nod. "Nora." "Mother." "Mrs. Caldwell." Nora's voice was carefully neutral. For a moment, they stood in an uncomfortable triangle, 2 years of hurt and anger crackling between them. Other guests pretended not to watch, while obviously straining to hear every word. "Well," Evelyn said finally, "I suppose we should be civilized for Isabel's sake. It wasn't an apology, wasn't even an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but it was as close to a peace offering as Evelyn Caldwell was capable of making." Ethan felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. The afternoon proceeded with careful politeness. Ethan chatted with cousins and family friends who seemed genuinely pleased to see him, while Nora found herself in conversation with Isabel's friends' younger women who were fascinated by her work with the literacy program. "It must be so rewarding," said one woman, "working with those people." "Those people are just like us," Nora replied gently. "They simply didn't have the same opportunities." For a while, it almost felt normal, almost like they belonged here again. Then came the gift opening. Isabel settled into an ornate chair, surrounded by towers of presents, each one more elaborate than the last. There were designer baby clothes, antique silver rattles, a hand-carved crib that had probably cost more than most cars. Nora and Ethan had brought a simple gift, a first edition of Goodnight Moon that Nora had found at a used bookstore, along with a hand-knitted blanket she had made herself. It was thoughtful and personal, but modest compared to the extravagance surrounding it. "Oh, how lovely," Isabel said when she opened their gift, and her appreciation seemed genuine. "I've always loved this book, and this blanket is beautiful." "Nora, did you make it yourself?" "I did. I learned to knit from one of my students. She taught me in exchange for reading lessons." "That's wonderful. It's so much more meaningful than anything store-bought." But Ethan noticed the glances exchanged between some of the other guests, the subtle smirks at the simple gift among all the luxury items. The real blow came near the end of the gift opening. Beatrice, Daniel's wife's sister and one of Evelyn's closest friends, approached Nora with a wrapped package. "I have something for you too, dear," Beatrice said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nora looked confused. "For me? But this is Isabel's shower." "Oh, but I thought you might need this for all the entertaining you'll be doing." Nora unwrapped the package to reveal a plain white apron knot, the decorative kind used for light cooking, but the type worn by domestic help, practical, utilitarian, designed for serious work. The insult was clear to everyone present. The message was unmistakable. This was where Nora belonged, not as a guest, but as hired help. A cruel silence fell over the gathering. Some women looked shocked, others amused. Isabel's face went pale with embarrassment and anger. "Beatrice, that's completely inappropriate," Isabel began. But Beatrice wasn't finished. "Well, since she'll never need maternity clothes, I thought she might as well have something useful." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. Ethan saw her face go white, saw her hands shake as she held the apron. 2 years of failed attempts to conceive, 2 years of monthly disappointments and increasing desperation, all summed up in one cruel observation. Something snapped inside Ethan. He stepped forward and took the apron from Nora's trembling hands. For a moment, the entire party held its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Ethan looked directly at Beatrice, his eyes blazing with a fury that made several guests step back. Then, with deliberate precision, he tore the apron in half. The sound of ripping fabric was loud in the sudden silence. "You're right," Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "My wife will never need that because she's not a servant. She's not here to clean up after you, or cater to your petty cruelties." He tore the apron again, reducing it to pieces. "She's here because she has a kind heart and believed that family could overcome hatred. She was wrong." Ethan scattered the pieces of the apron at Beatrice's feet, then turned and swept Nora into his arms, lifting her off the ground as if she were a queen, and he her devoted knight. "Ladies," he said to the shocked gathering, "my wife and I are leaving, and we won't be coming back." He carried Nora through the silent party, through the house where he had been raised, past the portraits of ancestors who had never known love like this. With each step, he felt himself shedding the last vestiges of his old life, choosing once and for all the woman in his arms over the world that had shaped him. At the door, Isabel caught up with them. "Ethan, wait. I'm so sorry." Beatrice had no right. "It's not your fault, Isabel," Ethan said gently. "Take care of yourself and the baby. Will I see you again?" Ethan looked back at the house, at the party still frozen in shock on the terrace, at his mother watching from the French doors with an expression he couldn't read. "Not here," he said finally. "Not like this." In the taxi riding home, Nora finally broke down, sobbing against Ethan's chest with a grief that went beyond the day's humiliation to touch the deepest fears of her heart. "Maybe she's right," she whispered. "Maybe I can't give you what you need." "Stop." Ethan's voice was fierce. "You give me everything I need, everything that matters. But children, if children come, they'll be a blessing. If they don't, you're still the greatest blessing of my life." He held her closer, feeling her tears soak through his shirt. "I carried you out of there like a queen because that's what you are. You're my queen, my partner, my heart, and I will never let anyone make you feel less than that again." That night, they burned the invitation in their fireplace and made love with desperate passion, reaffirming their bond against a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. The war for their love had escalated, but their resolve had only grown stronger. They would build their own family, their own legacy, their own definition of what it meant to have a life worth living. And they would do it together. Chapter 5. Broken Dreams. The morning Nora first felt nauseous, she attributed it to stress. Work at the Literacy Center had been particularly demanding, with a new grant requiring extensive documentation and several students struggling with personal crises that kept her up at night worrying. She had always been the type to carry others' burdens as if they were her own. But when the nausea persisted for a week, accompanied by a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure, a tiny flame of hope began to flicker in her heart. She was 3 days late. For any other woman, 3 days might mean nothing. But Nora had been tracking her cycles obsessively for 2 years, hoping and praying each month for the miracle that never came. She knew her body's rhythms better than she knew her own reflection. She bought the pregnancy test on a Tuesday evening, hiding it in her purse like contraband. Ethan was working late at his investment firm, trying to secure funding for a new project that would bring clean water to rural communities. She had hours to herself, hours to either confirm her wildest dreams or face another crushing disappointment. In the privacy of their bathroom, hands shaking, she followed the instructions she had memorized from previous tests. 2 minutes felt like a lifetime. She paced the small space, touching the familiar objects: Ethan's razor, her moisturizer, the framed photo of them on their honeymoon, as if they were talismans that could influence the outcome. When she finally looked at the test, her legs nearly gave out. 2 pink lines: clear, unmistakable, beautiful, pregnant. The word exploded through her consciousness like fireworks. After 3 years of marriage, 2.5 years of trying, countless medical appointments, and fertility tests that revealed nothing definitively wrong, she was finally carrying Ethan's child. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, staring at the test as if it might disappear if she looked away. Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude to whatever force in the universe had finally answered her prayers. Their baby. Ethan's baby. The child everyone said she could never have. For 20 minutes, she sat alone with the secret, savoring the moment before it became real to anyone else. She imagined telling Ethan, imagined the look on his face when he learned he was going to be a father. She imagined calling Dr. Larson to schedule her first appointment, imagined hearing the heartbeat for the first time. Most of all, she imagined proving wrong every cruel voice that had declared her barren, worthless, incomplete. When Ethan came home that evening, Nora was cooking his favorite dinner. Pasta with the pesto she made from scratch, garlic bread, a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. "Something smells incredible," he said, kissing her neck as she stirred the sauce. "What's the occasion? Can't a wife cook a nice dinner for her husband without a special occasion?" But Ethan knew her too well. He studied her face, noting the brightness in her eyes, the barely contained excitement in her movements. "Nora, what's going on?" You look like you're about to burst." She turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. This was the moment she had dreamed of for so long. "Ethan," she said softly, "how do you feel about becoming a father?" For a moment, he didn't understand. She watched confusion flicker across his face, followed by dawning comprehension, then disbelief. Then pure, explosive joy. Are we? We're having a baby." Ethan's whoop of joy could probably be heard 3 blocks away. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he finally set her down, his hands immediately went to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered in wonder. "Our baby. I took the test 3 times. All positive. When? How far along? Are you feeling okay? Do we need to call the doctor?" His excitement was infectious, filling their small apartment with a joy so bright it seemed to illuminate every corner. They spent the evening making plans, discussing names, talking about the nursery they would create in their spare room. "What if it's a girl?" Ethan said as they lay in bed, his hand protectively covering her belly. "Then she'll be strong and smart and kind, just like her father. What if it's a boy? Then he'll be compassionate and brave and loving, just like his father." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "They said you couldn't have children. They were wrong." Nora's voice was firm. "We're having a baby, Ethan. Our miracle baby." They made an appointment with Dr. Larson for the following week, but Nora immediately started seeing her OB/GYN, Dr. Grace Liu. They told only Dr. Liu about the pregnancy initially, planning to wait until after the first trimester to share the news with others. The blood tests confirmed what they already knew. She was approximately 6 weeks pregnant, due in late November. "Everything looks perfect so far," Dr. Liu said with a smile. "Your hormone levels are excellent, and you're clearly healthy. We'll do the first ultrasound at 8 weeks. They decided to keep the pregnancy secret for the first trimester, a decision that proved both wise and torturous. Nora felt like she was walking around with the most wonderful secret in the world, one that wanted to burst out of her every time she spoke to anyone. The morning sickness was actually a blessing in disguise. It made the pregnancy feel more real, more normal. When she vomited quietly in the bathroom at work, she smiled through her discomfort. This was what pregnant women experienced. This was proof that her body was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. At 8 weeks, they had their first ultrasound. The tiny blob on the screen didn't look like much to an untrained eye, but to Ethan and Nora, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Liu said, pointing to a flickering on the screen. "Strong and steady at 165 beats per minute. Perfect." Ethan squeezed Nora's hand so hard she thought he might break her fingers. They had both been holding their breath until they heard that heartbeat, the sound that made everything real. "Can we have copies of the pictures?" Ethan asked. "Of course. First-time parents always want plenty of photos." They carried those ultrasound images like precious treasures. Ethan kept one in his wallet, and Nora tucked one into her purse. Sometimes during quiet moments at work, she would take it out just to look at the proof that their miracle was real. By 10 weeks, Nora had started showing slightly, just a gentle rounding that could be hidden under loose clothes, but was noticeable to her when she looked in the mirror. She found herself talking to the baby constantly, telling it about their plans, their dreams, the life they would build together. "Your daddy is going to teach you to ride a bike," she would whisper while Ethan was at work, "and to swim in the ocean. He's going to read you stories every night and make you the best pancakes in the world." At 12 weeks, Dr. Frumseden Liu said they were officially out of the highest risk period for miscarriage. That night, they celebrated by telling their closest friends and beginning to make more concrete plans for the nursery. But at 14 weeks, on a Thursday morning in May, Nora woke up to find blood on her sheets. Not a lot of blood, but enough to send ice through her veins. She lay perfectly still for a moment, hoping she was imagining it, hoping the spots of red were somehow a trick of the morning light. "Ethan," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Ethan, something's wrong. I'm bleeding." The drive to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of their lives. Ethan held her hand while she lay in the emergency room bed, both of them clinging to hope while fear clawed at their hearts. Dr. Liu arrived within an hour, her face professionally calm, but her eyes sympathetic. Let's take a look and see what's happening. The ultrasound that had been a source of joy just 2 weeks earlier now felt like a potential death sentence. Nora stared at the screen, searching desperately for the flicker that had become the most important thing in her world. There was none. "I'm sorry, doctor," Liu said softly. "There's no heartbeat." The fetus stopped developing around 10 weeks gestation. The words hit them like physical blows. Nora felt as if the world had suddenly gone silent, as if all sound had been sucked out of the universe. "But I felt fine," she whispered. "He still felt pregnant." "That's unfortunately common, Doctor," Liu explained gently. "Sometimes the body doesn't immediately recognize the loss. Your hormone levels may have remained elevated, which is why you didn't experience symptoms until now. This is what we call a missed miscarriage. Can you do something? Fix it?" The hope in Nora's voice was heartbreaking. "Doctor." Liu's expression grew even more sympathetic. "I'm afraid not. This is what we call a missed miscarriage. The pregnancy is no longer viable. The clinical language couldn't soften the devastating reality. Their baby, their miracle baby, was gone." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and forms to sign. They could either wait for Nora's body to naturally expel the pregnancy or schedule a D&C to remove the tissue. Either option felt like a betrayal of the child they had already begun to love. They chose to wait, hoping that somehow nature would be gentler than surgery. It wasn't. The miscarriage began that night and lasted for 3 agonizing days. Nora lay in bed, Ethan holding her as waves of pain washed over her, not just physical pain, but the excruciating emotional agony of losing something precious. "I'm sorry," she sobbed against his chest. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep our baby safe." "This isn't your fault," Ethan said fiercely, his own tears falling into her hair. "This isn't anyone's fault." But Nora couldn't shake the feeling that her body had failed them, failed their child. All the cruel voices from his family seemed to echo in her mind. "Barren, inferior stock, can't give you what you need." On the 3rd day, Ethan called Dr. Liu in desperation. "She hasn't stopped crying. She won't eat. I don't know how to help her. Grief is normal, Doctor," Liu assured him. "But if she's not functioning after a week, we should consider counseling. Sometimes pregnancy loss trauma requires professional support." It was Daniel who delivered the cruelest blow of all. He arrived at their apartment unannounced on the 5th day, claiming he had heard through mutual friends about their loss. Nora was still in bed, too devastated to face the world, so Ethan met his brother in their small living room. "I'm sorry for your loss," Daniel said, but his tone suggested anything but sympathy. "Thank you, though I suppose it's for the best, really." Ethan went very still. "Excuse me? Well, you have to admit, bringing a child into your situation wouldn't have been ideal. No family support, limited financial resources, and given her history. Get out." "Ethan, I'm trying to be helpful. This proves what we've been saying all along. She's not capable of carrying children to term. Her family's genetics." Ethan's fist connected with Daniel's jaw before he could finish the sentence. His brother staggered backward, blood trickling from his split lip. "Get out, Ethan. Get out before I kill you." Daniel left, but his poison remained. The suggestion that their baby's death was somehow inevitable, that Nora's body was fundamentally flawed, ate at both of them like acid. It was Evelyn Caldwell who delivered the final crushing blow. She arrived at the hospital during Nora's follow-up appointment, somehow having learned when they would be there. Ethan and Nora emerged from Dr. Liu's office to find her standing in the corridor, dressed in black as if attending a funeral. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "I came to see how you're both doing. I heard about your disappointment." The word choice was deliberate and cutting, not loss, not tragedy, but disappointment, as if their grief was merely an inconvenience. "We're managing," Ethan said tightly. Evelyn turned to Nora, who was still pale and fragile from the ordeal. "I'm sorry this happened to you, dear, but perhaps it's a sign." "A sign of what?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "That some things aren't meant to be. Some women simply aren't built for motherhood. Even her womb rejects life." The cruelty of the words was breathtaking. Nora made a small, wounded sound and swayed on her feet. Ethan caught her, his face blazing with fury. "How dare you?" he said, his voice deadly quiet. "How dare you come here and torture a grieving woman? I'm trying to help you see reality. The only reality I see is that you're a heartless monster who finds pleasure in others' pain. Ethan, I'm your mother." "No." His voice echoed through the hospital corridor. "You stopped being my mother the day you chose cruelty over compassion. You are nothing to me now, nothing to us. And if I ever see you near my wife again, I will have you arrested for harassment." Evelyn's face went white with shock and rage. "You'll regret this, Ethan. You'll regret choosing her over your family. I regret having a family capable of this kind of evil." After she left, Nora collapsed completely. The combination of physical recovery and emotional devastation had pushed her beyond her limits. Dr. Liu admitted her for observation, concerned about her mental state. For 3 days, Nora lay in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, refusing to speak to anyone except Ethan. She had lost not just their baby, but also her faith in her own body, her own worth as a woman. On the 4th day, Ethan climbed into the narrow hospital bed beside her and held her close. "We're going to get through this," he whispered. "Together." "What if they're right?" she whispered back. "What if I can't? What if we can never? Then we'll build a different kind of family. We'll love differently, but we'll love completely." It would take months for Nora to heal physically and emotionally. The hole left by their lost child would never completely disappear. But eventually, they would learn to carry their grief as a testament to how much they had loved something so small, so briefly held. And in that shared sorrow, their love for each other would grow even deeper, tempered by loss but strengthened by the knowledge that they could survive anything as long as they faced it together. The war for their love had claimed its most precious casualty, but it had not claimed them. They would endure. They would overcome. They would love again. Chapter 6. Pulpit Revolution. A year had passed since the miscarriage, year of quiet healing and rebuilding. Ethan and Nora had thrown themselves into their work. His investment firm was growing steadily, funding projects that made a real difference in the world. While her literacy program had expanded to serve over 300 adults across the Bay Area, they had learned to carry their grief like a sacred weight, honoring their lost child while slowly opening their hearts to hope again. They had also learned to avoid places where they might encounter the Caldwell family. San Francisco was a large city, but certain circles were small, and they had developed an instinct for steering clear of events, restaurants, and venues where painful confrontations might occur, which made it all the more shocking when Henry Caldwell appeared at their apartment door on a Sunday morning in September, dressed in his finest suit and carrying what looked like an ultimatum. "Father." Ethan stood in the doorway, genuinely surprised. They hadn't spoken since the hospital incident, and Ethan had assumed their estrangement was permanent. "May I come in? There's something we need to discuss." Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped aside. Henry entered their small apartment, his expensive clothes and commanding presence, making the space feel even more modest than usual. Nora emerged from the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, coffee cup in hand. "Mr. Caldwell," she said carefully. "Nora." Henry nodded stiffly. "You're looking well." The politeness felt dangerous, like the calm before a storm. Ethan remained standing, ready to escort his father out at the first sign of trouble. "What do you want?" Ethan asked bluntly. Henry settled himself in their best chair without being invited. "I want to make you an offer. Both of you. We're not interested in anything you're offering. You haven't heard it yet." Henry's voice took on the tone he used in boardroom negotiations. "I've been watching your little business ventures. Impressive work, actually. You've got a good eye for profitable social investments. It's not about profit. Everything is about profit, son, one way or another. Even charity has to be sustainable to be effective." Henry paused, then continued. "I'm prepared to make you an offer. Come back to Caldwell Industries. Bring your wife's literacy program under our charitable foundation. You'll have unlimited funding, corporate backing, the ability to help thousands instead of hundreds." The offer was breathtaking in its scope. With Caldwell Industries' resources, they could transform their work, create a national program that could change countless lives. "What's the catch?" Nora asked quietly. Henry smiled. And Ethan recognized the expression from childhood, the look his father got when he was about to present terms, that seemed generous but came with strings attached. Simple. You both attend church with the family today. Pastor Thompson is delivering a special sermon on family values. And it would mean a great deal to your mother to have her entire family present. Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. Hear me out. One morning, 3 hours of your time. In exchange, millions of dollars in funding for causes you care about. Think of how many people you could help. Ethan saw the conflict in Nora's eyes. The offer was tempting, almost irresistible. With that kind of backing, her literacy program could become a national model, helping tens of thousands of adults achieve their dreams. And after church, Ethan asked, we have a civilized conversation about the future, about finding a way to be a family again? While Nora is treated as a second-class citizen, while Nora is welcomed back into the fold, provided she understands her place in it. The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound conciliatory, while maintaining the fundamental power dynamic. Henry was offering to tolerate Nora, not accept her, to include her conditionally, not embrace her unconditionally. We need to discuss this privately, Nora said before Ethan could refuse. After Henry left, they sat at their small kitchen table, the weight of the decision hanging between them. It's a trap, Ethan said firmly. Everything he does is a trap. Maybe, but think about what we could accomplish with that funding. Ethan, we could change thousands of lives. At what cost? Your dignity? Our marriage? One morning, 3 hours. If it means we can help that many people. Ethan studied her face, seeing the internal struggle. Nora had never lost her optimistic belief that people could change, that love could overcome hatred. It was one of the things he loved most about her, and also one of the things that worried him most. You want to do this? I want to try for all the people we could help, for the chance, however small, that your family might remember how to love. They attended St. Matthew's Episcopal Church that morning, the grand cathedral where Ethan had been confirmed, where he had learned Bible verses and choir songs, where he had once believed in the simple goodness of faith and family. The Caldwell family occupied their traditional pew in the front section, a space they had claimed for 3 generations. Ethan and Nora slipped in beside them, and he felt the familiar mixture of nostalgia and resentment that came with returning to childhood places. His mother, Evelyn, wore a navy blue dress and her most regal expression. She nodded coolly to them both but didn't speak. Daniel and Isabel were there with their 2 children, little Oliver toddling around the pew while baby Charlotte slept in her mother's arms. The sight of the children hit Nora like a physical blow. Ethan saw her face go pale, saw her hand unconsciously move to her stomach. Every family gathering was a reminder of what they had lost, what they couldn't seem to achieve. Pastor Thompson took the pulpit with the commanding presence that had made him a favorite among San Francisco's elite congregations. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a voice that could fill the cathedral without amplification. Today, I want to speak about the biblical foundation of family, he began, and Ethan felt his stomach tighten, about the proper order that God intended for marriage and society. What followed was 45 minutes of thinly veiled attack, disguised as theological discourse. Pastor Thompson spoke about wives who knew their place, about the importance of biblical submission, about marriages that produced fruitful offspring as a sign of God's blessing. Some unions, the pastor declared, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, are blessed with children as a sign of divine approval. Others struggle with barrenness as a reflection of spiritual deficiency. Ethan felt Nora flinch beside him. Around them, he could sense the congregation's attention focusing on their pew, on his wife, who sat with her head held high despite the public humiliation. The Bible teaches us that a woman's greatest calling is motherhood. Pastor Thompson continued, those who cannot fulfill this sacred duty must ask themselves, what sin prevents God's blessing? What spiritual failing blocks the natural order? Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a sermon. It was character assassination delivered from the pulpit, using God's word as a weapon to destroy his wife's spirit. But Pastor Thompson wasn't finished. And what of the men who choose such women? The men who place temporary passion above their duty to family, to legacy, to the proper order of things? Are they not equally culpable for disrupting God's plan? It was too much. Ethan stood abruptly, his movement causing heads to turn throughout the cathedral. Sit down, Evelyn hissed. No, Ethan said clearly. I won't sit here and listen to this. Pastor Thompson paused in his sermon, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. "Mr. Caldwell, is there something you'd like to share with the congregation?" The question was meant to be rhetorical, designed to embarrass Ethan into sitting down and accepting the public shaming. Instead, Ethan stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the pulpit. "Actually, yes, there is something I'd like to share." The congregation stirred uneasily. This was unprecedented. No one interrupted Pastor Thompson, certainly not during a sermon. Absolutely not a member of the Caldwell family. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Henry's voice carried from the front pew. "I'm bearing witness," Ethan replied, still walking. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do in church? Bear witness to truth." He reached the front of the cathedral and turned to face the congregation. Hundreds of faces stared back at him, some shocked, some curious, some already hardening with disapproval. "Pastor Thompson just delivered a sermon about family values," Ethan began, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "About proper marriages and God's blessings and spiritual deficiency. I'd like to offer a different perspective." "Sir, this is highly inappropriate," Pastor Thompson began. "What's inappropriate," Ethan said, turning to face the pastor, "is using this pulpit to attack a woman who has devoted her life to serving others. What's inappropriate is twisting scripture to justify cruelty. What's inappropriate is standing in God's house and preaching hatred disguised as righteousness." He turned back to the congregation, finding Nora's face in the crowd. She was pale but sitting straighter now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My wife," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger, "has taught over 500 adults to read. She has given people the gift of literacy, the power to read to their children, the ability to fill out job applications and understand legal documents. She has changed lives in the most fundamental way possible." The congregation was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "Pastor Thompson suggests that our inability to have children is a sign of God's displeasure. I suggest that God measures love differently than we do. I suggest that a woman who teaches a 70-year-old grandmother to read her Bible for the first time might be more blessed than a woman who simply produces heirs." Several people in the congregation shifted uncomfortably. This was not the kind of message they were accustomed to hearing. "The Bible I learned about as a child spoke of love," Ethan continued. "It spoke of caring for the least among us, of judging not lest you be judged, of loving your neighbor as yourself. When did we decide that bloodlines mattered more than kindness? When did we decide that social standing mattered more than service?" Evelyn Caldwell had gone white with fury, but she didn't dare interrupt. "Not here, not in front of everyone." "My family," Ethan said, his voice now carrying the power of absolute conviction, "sits in the front pew of this church every Sunday. They write generous checks to the building fund. They host charity galas and serve on boards and maintain all the appearances of Christian living." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But they have spent 5 years trying to destroy the greatest love I have ever known. They have attacked my wife publicly, privately, and now from this very pulpit. They have used grief as a weapon and turned faith into a tool for cruelty." Pastor Thompson tried to interrupt. "Mr. Caldwell, I must insist." "You must insist on nothing," Ethan said fiercely. "This is God's house, not yours. And God's house is supposed to be a sanctuary for all people, not a battlefield for family politics." He walked back toward Nora but stopped halfway down the aisle. "I learned something important today," he announced to the silent congregation. "I learned that love is my religion. My wife is its holiest scripture. Her kindness is my gospel, her compassion my creed, and no amount of social pressure or religious manipulation will ever convince me to abandon the most sacred thing in my life." He reached their pew and extended his hand to Nora. "Come on, darling. Let's go home." She took his hand and stood, and together they walked down the aisle of the cathedral where he had been baptized, confirmed, and married. Behind them, the congregation erupted in whispers and exclamations. At the doors of the cathedral, Ethan turned back one last time. "My family wanted me here today to be reminded of my obligations," he called out, his voice echoing through the space. "Mission accomplished. I am reminded that my obligation is to love, to honor, and to protect the woman who chose to share her life with me. I am reminded that true faith requires courage, not conformity." They walked out into the September sunshine, leaving behind the last vestige of Ethan's old life. In the parking lot, Nora finally broke down, sobbing against his chest. "That was the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me," she whispered. "It was the least you deserved, and the most they had coming." Behind them, the cathedral doors remained firmly closed. Whatever conversation Henry Caldwell had envisioned would never happen now. The bridge between Ethan and his family hadn't just been burned, it had been incinerated from the pulpit of God's house. But as they drove home to their small apartment, to their modest life built on love rather than legacy, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. He had chosen his religion, and it was love. He had chosen his family, and it was Nora. Everything else was just noise. Chapter 7. Exile and Healing. The years that followed the church confrontation became known between Ethan and Nora as their wilderness years, a time of exile from everything they had known, but also a time of profound growth and healing. If the Caldwell family had intended their rejection to destroy them, they had catastrophically miscalculated. Instead of breaking under the pressure, Ethan and Nora used their isolation to build something entirely new, entirely their own. The first change came within a month of the church incident. Ethan sold their apartment in Pacific Heights, too close to his family's world. Too heavy with memories of Lawson, they moved to a Victorian house in the Mission District. It was a neighborhood in transition, where artists and activists mixed with longtime Latino families, where authenticity mattered more than ancestry. The house itself was a labor of love. Built in 1906 and somehow spared by the Great Earthquake, it had beautiful bones but needed everything else. Ethan and Nora spent weekends learning to refinish hardwood floors, strip wallpaper, and replace ancient plumbing. Every room they restored was a room that belonged completely to them, unmarked by family history or social expectations. "Look at us," Nora laughed one Saturday evening as they collapsed on the living room floor, covered in paint and sawdust. "Two people who've never done manual labor in their lives, and we're actually making this work." "We're making everything work," Ethan replied, pulling her close despite their grimy clothes. "We're making it all work." The house became a sanctuary, but it also became something more, a gathering place for people who, like them, existed outside the traditional boundaries of San Francisco society. Their living room hosted literacy classes on Tuesday nights, where Nora taught and Ethan helped with basic math and writing skills. Their kitchen became the unofficial headquarters for a dozen small nonprofits, with meetings that went late into the night and always seemed to involve too much coffee and not enough funding. Ethan's investment firm, Caldwell Social Capital, grew steadily during these years. He had discovered a talent for identifying companies that could do well by doing good: renewable energy startups, fair trade cooperatives, technology platforms that connected underserved communities to resources. His clients were mostly other social entrepreneurs, people who measured success in changed lives rather than just profit margins. "Traditional investors think I'm crazy," he told Nora one evening as they reviewed the year's returns. "But we're proving that ethical investing can be profitable. We're making money while making a difference." "Your grandfather would be proud," Nora said softly. Samuel Caldwell had been the only member of Ethan's family who had understood love, and his memory remained a guiding force in their lives. Nora's literacy program, now called the Bay Area Reading Initiative, had expanded beyond anything she had originally imagined. With funding from Ethan's investor network and grants from progressive foundations, she had opened 3 learning centers across the city and was training other instructors to replicate their methods statewide. But it was the people they served who truly transformed them. There was Maria, a 53-year-old house cleaner who learned to read so she could help her grandson with homework. There was Jamal, a former gang member who earned his GED and went on to become a community organizer. There was May, a Chinese immigrant who started with basic English and ended up writing poetry that moved everyone to tears. "Each person we help teaches us something," Nora explained to a group of potential donors. "Maria taught me about persistence. Jamal taught me about redemption. May taught me that words have the power to heal wounds we didn't even know existed." The work was deeply fulfilling, but it also served another purpose. It filled the spaces in their hearts that might otherwise have been consumed by grief over their childlessness. They became parents to hundreds of adult students, mentors to young nonprofits, guardians of dreams that might otherwise have died in poverty or despair. It was during their 7th year of marriage that they met the 3 children who would change their lives forever. Javier was 8 when he first appeared at their Tuesday night class, having accompanied his grandmother, Maria. But clearly fascinated by the lessons, He had been born in the United States but spent his early years in Mexico with relatives, returning to San Francisco with limited English and an unstable living situation. "Can I learn too?" he asked Nora one evening, his dark eyes serious beyond his years. "Of course, sweetheart. Learning is for everyone." Within months, Javier was reading at grade level and helping translate for Spanish-speaking students, but it was his home situation that broke their hearts. Maria was elderly and struggling to care for him while working multiple jobs. The boy's parents had been deported when he was 6, leaving him with few legal protections and fewer opportunities. Isabel and Gabriel came as a package deal siblings aged 10 and 12 who had aged out of foster care placements and were living in a group home that felt more like a warehouse for unwanted children. They started attending literacy classes, not because they couldn't read, but because the Tuesday night gatherings offered them something their institutional life lacked: warmth, attention, a sense of belonging. "These kids," Ethan said one night after driving all 3 home to their respective situations, "they need more than we can give them in a classroom." "I know," Nora replied. "I've been thinking the same thing." The conversation that followed lasted weeks. They talked about foster care, about adoption, about the legal and emotional complexities of opening their home to children who had already experienced more trauma than most adults. They talked about their own losses, their fears, their capacity to love children who weren't biologically theirs. Most of all, they talked about the realization that family could be chosen, that love could be intentional, that the most meaningful bonds were often forged by choice rather than genetics. The process of becoming licensed foster parents was grueling. Home studies, background checks, interviews that probed every aspect of their relationship and their motivations. Some social workers were skeptical of a wealthy couple who wanted to help older children. Weren't they just trying to assuage their guilt about their privileged lives? But Nora's 15 years of work with marginalized communities spoke for itself, as did Ethan's reputation for ethical business practices. More importantly, Javier, Isabel, and Gabriel spoke for them. "They're the only adults who ever kept their promises to me," Isabel told her social worker with 12-year-old bluntness. "They said they'd help me with school, and they did. They said they'd be there when I needed them, and they're not trying to save us. They're just trying to love us." Javier moved in with them first during year 8 of their marriage, on a temporary placement that was supposed to last 6 months, while Maria recovered from surgery. 6 months became a year, then permanent guardianship, then formal adoption when he was 10. He thrived in their structured but nurturing environment, excelling in school, and developing a passion for both reading and social justice that reminded Ethan of Nora at that age. Isabel and Gabriel followed during year 9. Their adoption finalized on a Tuesday in spring that Ethan and Nora would remember as one of the happiest days of their lives. The judge who presided over the hearing commented that she had rarely seen children so clearly intended for their adoptive family. "You didn't rescue us," Gabriel said that evening at their celebratory dinner. "We rescued each other." The house that had once felt too big for 2 people suddenly felt perfectly sized for a family of 5. The spare bedrooms became spaces for homework and sleepovers, and the kind of chaos that comes with teenagers learning to trust love. The kitchen island that had hosted nonprofit meetings now served as the command center for school projects and college applications. "Listen to this," Nora said one evening, reading from Isabel's college essay. "I learned that family isn't about sharing DNA. It's about sharing dreams. My parents taught me that love is a choice you make every day, not an accident of birth." Ethan looked around their dinner table, Javier helping Gabriel with calculus, Isabel editing an article for the school newspaper, Nora grading adult education assignments while keeping one eye on everyone else. This was what family looked like. This was what love could build when freed from the constraints of tradition and expectation. But it was their work with struggling couples that truly completed their transformation from victims of family cruelty to healers of family wounds. It started accidentally. A couple from Nora's literacy program was facing divorce, the stress of financial hardship and educational challenges creating a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. Ethan and Nora found themselves serving as informal counselors, sharing their own story of surviving family opposition and personal loss. "You've been through worse than we have," the husband said during one of their kitchen table conversations. "If you can stay together after all that, maybe we can figure this out, too." Word spread, as it does in tight-knit communities. Other couples began asking for advice, then for more formal help. Ethan and Nora found themselves facilitating weekend retreats for couples in crisis, teaching communication skills they had learned through their own trials. Marriage isn't about avoiding storms, Ethan would tell these groups. It's about learning to dance in the rain together. They developed workshops on financial stress, family conflict, loss of children, infertility struggles. Each program drew from their own experiences, but was grounded in professional resources and expert guidance. Within 5 years, their marriage ministry was serving hundreds of couples annually. We are not therapists, Nora always made clear. We are survivors. We can tell you what helped us, but you have to find your own way through. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply rewarding. They watched couples on the brink of divorce rediscover their connection. They saw families torn apart by external pressure learn to stand together. They witnessed the transformative power of love that refused to surrender to circumstances. By their 15th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Nora had built something unprecedented. A life that measured success not in social status or financial accumulation, but in relationships nurtured, lives changed, love multiplied. Their exile from his family had become the foundation for a different kind of legacy entirely. Do you ever regret it? Nora asked one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching their teenagers play basketball in the street with neighborhood kids. Everything we gave up to get here. Ethan considered the question seriously. They had sacrificed financial security, social standing, family connections. Their house was comfortable but modest. Their cars were reliable but unremarkable. They would never have the wealth or prestige that could have been his inheritance, but they had built something richer than money, stronger than social position, more lasting than family name. I regret that it took so much pain to get here, he said finally. I regret that my family couldn't see what we were building. But regret our choices? Never. Good, Nora smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Because I have an announcement to make. Ethan tensed slightly. Announcements in their household could mean anything from college acceptance letters to unexpected pregnancy tests to new rescue dogs. The MacArthur Foundation called today, she continued. I've been selected for a fellowship. The MacArthur Genius Grant was the highest honor in Nora's field, recognition of her innovative approaches to adult education and community building. The financial award would allow her to expand their programs nationally. I'm so proud of you, Ethan said, pulling her close. You've earned this recognition 1,000 times over. We've earned it, she corrected. Everything we've built together. As they sat in the gathering dusk, watching their chosen family and chosen community create the kind of vibrant neighborhood life they had always dreamed of, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The Caldwell family had intended to break them through isolation and rejection. Instead, they had forced Ethan and Nora to discover their own strength, their own values, their own definition of what it meant to live a meaningful life. They had found their way out of the wilderness and into something better than the promised land they had lost. They had found their way home. Chapter 8. Second Chances. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, during their 20th year of marriage. Nora was reviewing applications for their expanded literacy program when the phone rang, displaying a number she hadn't seen in years but somehow recognized. Mrs. Caldwell. This is Isabel Caldwell, Daniel's wife. We met years ago at at various family events. I hope you remember me. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. She remembered Isabel perfectly, the only member of Ethan's family who had ever shown her genuine kindness, the woman whose baby shower had ended in such devastating humiliation 15 years earlier. Of course, I remember you, Isabel. How are you? There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like carefully suppressed tears. I'm calling because I need help. My marriage is falling apart, and I don't know where else to turn. The conversation that followed was halting, painful, filled with the awkwardness of reaching across 20 years of family warfare. Isabel's voice was different now, older, sadder, stripped of the confidence that had characterized her in her youth. Daniel's having an affair, she said finally. Has been for months, maybe years. Our marriage has been dying slowly, and too remembered what you and Ethan built together, how you survived everything my family put you through. I thought maybe you could help me figure out how to save what's left of mine. Nora felt the familiar tug of compassion that had guided her life's work, but also the weariness that came from decades of Caldwell family cruelty. "Isabel, I appreciate you thinking of us, but given the history, I know what my family did to you, what I allowed them to do." Isabel's voice broke slightly. "I was a coward, Nora. I should have stood up for you, should have defended you when they attacked. I've regretted it every day for 20 years. The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile, uncertain, but offering the possibility of connection across a chasm that had seemed unbridgeable. "Where are your children in all this?" Nora asked gently. "Oliver is 18, Charlotte is 16, and Liam is 13. They know something's wrong, but they don't know what. Daniel acts like nothing's happening, like our family isn't disintegrating around us." Nora closed her eyes, thinking of her own children. Javier, now 28, and working as a teacher in Oakland. Isabel, 26, and in her final year of law school. Gabriel, 24 and studying social work. They had all grown up surrounded by love and honesty, even when the truth was difficult. "Have you tried counseling?" Daniel refuses. He says therapists are for weak people who can't handle their own problems. Isabel's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had tried every option except the ones that might actually work. "Isabel, I want to help, but I need to talk to Ethan first. And I need you to understand. If we do this, it has to be completely separate from the larger family dynamic. We can't get pulled back into that destructive pattern." "I understand. I'm not asking you to reconcile with the family. I'm asking you to help me save my children from growing up in the same poisonous environment that destroyed so many relationships already." That evening, Nora shared the conversation with Ethan as they prepared dinner in their kitchen. The house was quieter now, with their children grown and living their own lives, but it still felt warm and alive with 20 years of accumulated love. "It could be a trap," Ethan said, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. "My family specializes in emotional manipulation. It could be, but it could also be genuine. And if it is, we help her because that's who we are." Ethan paused in his chopping and looked at his wife. "But we do it our way, on our terms. No family dinners, no attempts at reconciliation with my mother or father, just Isabel and her marriage." They met Isabel the following week at a neutral location, a small cafe in the Castro, where none of the Caldwell family would ever venture. She looked older than her 47 years, her once perfect blonde hair showing gray at the roots, her designer clothes unable to hide the weight of exhaustion she carried. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, settling into the booth across from them. "I wasn't sure you would." "We help families in crisis," Nora said simply. "That's what we do." What followed was a painful excavation of a marriage that had looked perfect from the outside, but had been slowly dying from neglect and contempt. Daniel, it emerged, had become a mirror image of his father. Successful, controlling, emotionally distant. He expected Isabel to maintain their social standing while he pursued whatever interests pleased him, including other women. "When did you stop talking to each other about things that mattered?" Ethan asked. Isabel considered the question seriously. "I think after Liam was born, Daniel decided our family was complete. Our roles were established. I was the perfect wife and mother. He was the successful businessman. We stopped being husband and wife and became business partners in the family enterprise." "Do you still love him?" Nora asked gently. "I love who he used to be. I love the memory of the man I married. But the person he's become." Isabel shook her head. "I don't know if that person is capable of love." The sessions that followed were difficult for everyone involved. Ethan found himself confronting painful memories of his own family dynamics, while Nora struggled with the impulse to protect Isabel from truths she might not be ready to hear. But slowly, Isabel began to find her voice, to articulate needs and boundaries she had suppressed for years. "I want to separate," she announced during their 6th session. "Not necessarily divorce, but I need space to figure out who I am outside of this marriage." "How do you think Daniel will react?" Ethan asked. "Badly. He'll see it as a betrayal, a threat to his reputation. He'll probably try to turn the children against me. Are you prepared for that fight?" Isabel straightened in her chair, and for the first time in months, Nora saw a glimpse of the strong woman she must have been before years of emotional erosion wore her down. "I'm prepared to fight for my children's emotional health." I'm prepared to model what it looks like to stand up for yourself. I won't let them grow up thinking this is what marriage is supposed to look like." The separation was indeed ugly. Daniel hired the most aggressive divorce attorney in the city and attempted to paint Isabel as an unfit mother. But Isabel had prepared well, documenting years of emotional neglect and infidelity. More importantly, she had learned to advocate for herself in ways that surprised everyone, including her own children. "Mom's different," 17-year-old Oliver told Nora during one of their family sessions. "She's stronger somehow, like she remembers she's a person, not just our mom or dad's wife." The process took almost 2 years, during which Ethan and Nora became an unlikely support system for Isabel and her children. They had no contact with the larger Caldwell family, but they created a safe space where Isabel could process her anger, grief, and gradual healing. It was during this period that other unexpected connections began to emerge. Abigail, Ethan's sister, reached out through Isabel with a tentative request for help with her own struggling marriage. Then came distant cousins, family friends. People who had witnessed the Caldwell family's dysfunctional patterns for years, but had never known there was an alternative. "We're accidentally becoming the family therapists for everyone you grew up with," Nora observed with dark humor. "Your mother must be furious." "My mother," Ethan replied, "can be furious all she wants. She created this mess with her toxic example of what marriage should look like. If we can help people escape that pattern, we should." Their marriage counseling practice expanded to include what they privately called recovering from family dysfunction workshops. They worked with couples who had grown up in households where love was conditional, where emotional manipulation was the primary form of communication, where children learned that relationships were power struggles rather than partnerships. The hardest part, Ethan would tell these groups, is learning to recognize love without conditions. When you've been raised to believe that love must be earned through compliance, unconditional love feels dangerous, almost impossible to trust. The work was deeply personal for him. Every couple they helped heal was, in some way, a redemption of his own family's failures. Their reputation grew beyond San Francisco. The MacArthur Fellowship had given Nora national visibility, and Ethan's ethical investment firm had become a model for social entrepreneurship. They were invited to speak at conferences, to consult with other nonprofits, to share their methods with organizations across the country. But it was a phone call from an unexpected source that truly marked their transition from local healers to national advocates. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Senator Ellen Carter from the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. I understand you and your wife have developed some innovative approaches to marriage counseling and adult education. We're exploring federal funding for programs like yours." The conversation led to Ethan and Nora testifying before Congress about the connection between family stability and economic development, between adult education and community health, between healing individual relationships and building stronger communities. "Every marriage we save," Nora told the committee, "affects not just 2 people, but their children, their extended family, their community. When we teach people to love without conditions, to communicate without manipulation, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics, we're investing in the foundation of our entire society." The federal funding that resulted allowed them to expand their programs to 50 cities across the country. They trained counselors, developed curricula, created support networks for couples trying to break generational cycles of dysfunction. Their house in the Mission became a pilgrimage site of sorts, a place where people came to see what a healthy relationship looked like, how a family could function without cruelty or competition. "You've built something remarkable," Isabel said during one of her regular visits. Her divorce had been finalized, and she was slowly rebuilding her life as a single mother and advocate for women's rights. "You've created the family that your parents never let you have." "We've created the family we chose to have," Ethan corrected gently. "The family we built through love, rather than obligation." By their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Nora had become nationally recognized experts in relationship healing. Their book, Love Without Conditions, was a bestseller. Their workshops had waiting lists months long. Universities invited them to lecture, and other therapists sought training in their methods. But perhaps their greatest achievement was visible every Sunday afternoon, when their house filled with the family they had chosen and created. Javier brought his fiancée and her children from a previous marriage. Isabel came with her law school friends, who had become like siblings to her. Gabriel arrived with his partner and their newly adopted daughter. Isabel often joined them, along with her children, who had learned to trust love again after watching their parents' marriage be reborn through separation and intentional reconnection. Abigail came occasionally, usually bringing updates about other family members who were slowly finding the courage to examine their own relationships. "Look at this." Nora marveled one Sunday as she surveyed their crowded living room. "Look what we built from nothing but love and stubbornness." Ethan pulled her close, watching their chosen family laugh and argue and support each other in the messy, beautiful way that real families do. "We built it from more than that," he said. "We built it from the belief that love is stronger than hate, that healing is possible, that families can be chosen as well as born. And from excellent communication skills," Nora added with a smile. "And from excellent communication skills," Ethan agreed, kissing the top of her head. Outside, the San Francisco fog was rolling in, but inside their house, warmth and love created a sanctuary that had drawn broken people for 2 decades and sent them back into the world healed, hopeful, and equipped to love without conditions. They had become living proof that second chances were possible, that love could triumph over even the most entrenched patterns of family dysfunction, and they were just getting started. Chapter 9, Twilight Miracle. At 48, Nora Caldwell had accepted her childless fate. 24 years of marriage had transformed her grief into purpose. Hundreds of adult students taught to read, dozens of marriages healed, 3 adopted children who called her mom. Her body had settled into middle age. Monthly cycles became sporadic, then absent. Menopause, Doktor. Liu had varnt. Nora welcomed it as the final closing of a painful chapter. Their children were thriving adults. Javier, 25, engaged to Sophia. Isabel, 24, practicing immigration law. Gabriel, 26, studying family therapy. "We did good," Ethan often said, watching them navigate adulthood with the emotional intelligence their family had instilled, which made the 15th of November utterly shocking. Nora was presenting at a school board meeting when the world tilted. Nausea struck first, then dizziness so severe she gripped the conference table. "Are you all right?" Principal Alvarez rushed to her side. At the emergency room, young Dr. Kim took her history. "Any chance of pregnancy?" Nora laughed. "I'm cordioid. Haven't had a period in months. Standard test anyway." Ethan arrived, pale with worry, still in his business suit. "Doctor," Kim returned with an expression Nora couldn't read. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're pregnant. 8 weeks." Silence. Then Ethan's whoop of joy echoed through the ER. "Impossible," Nora whispered. "Rare, but not impossible. One final ovulation before menopause." They sat stunned in the car afterward. "A baby," Ethan kept saying. "Our baby." That evening, surrounded by pregnancy books they'd stored away decades ago, reality sank in. "The risks at my age," Nora began. "We'll face whatever comes," Ethan said firmly. "Together." "Doctor." Liu agreed to manage the high-risk pregnancy. "Surprising, but your health is excellent," she assured them. 2 weeks later came the ultrasound. "Doctor." Liu moved the wand slowly across Nora's abdomen, frowning at the screen. "Is something wrong?" Nora's heart raced. "Wrong? No, doctor." Liu smiled broadly. "You're having twins." Ethan laughed. Pure hysteria and joy combined. Twins? Twin boys? Both developing perfectly. Nora stared at the screen, where 2 tiny forms flickered with strong heartbeats. After 24 years of empty arms, she carried not 1 miracle, but 2 boys. Ethan whispered wonderingly, "We're having sons." That night, they called their children. Each reacted with identical shock. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Isabel asked gently. "The risks." "These boys chose us," Nora replied. "After all these years, they chose us." "You'll be incredible parents," Gabriel said, crying again. The following weeks blurred with preparation. Genetic testing, normal, nutrition counseling, extensive changes needed, exercise modification carefully supervised, every precaution for a 48-year-old carrying twins. God's timing. Nora mused one evening, researching cribs online. 24 years of waiting. Then twins when we're practically grandparents. Maybe we needed to become who we are first, Ethan suggested. Maybe we needed to learn how to love without conditions before we could be trusted with this gift. Nora placed both hands on her expanding belly, where Jeremiah and Samuel God appoints, and God hears grew stronger each day. Our twilight miracle, she murmured. Ethan pulled her close. Our new beginning. Outside, San Francisco fog rolled in from the Pacific, but inside their small house, warmth and wonder created a sanctuary for the family that had chosen love over everything else. The greatest chapter of their story was just beginning. Chapter 10. Love's Victory. Labor began at 3:17 a.m. on a foggy February morning, 3 weeks early. At 48, carrying twins, Nora had expected complications. She hadn't expected the overwhelming peace that flooded her with the first contraction. "Ready," she whispered to Ethan. 12 hours later, Dr. Lou placed a perfect baby boy in Nora's arms. "Jeremiah," she breathed, studying his tiny features with wonder. 3 minutes later, Samuel arrived, smaller but equally flawless. Ethan held both sons, tears streaming down his face. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years we waited for you." Javier, Isabel, and Gabriel rushed in within hours, faces glowing with joy and disbelief. Javier, now 25, cradled his newborn brother with reverent hands. "They're perfect, Mom," Isabel whispered. "Absolutely perfect." For 3 blissful days, they existed in their bubble of new family magic. Friends visited, bringing flowers and congratulations. The literacy program staff sent a giant card, signed by hundreds of students. Their chosen family celebrated the miracle babies who had arrived when everyone thought the story was complete. On the 4th day, love achieved its ultimate victory. The knock came hesitantly. When Nora opened the door, Evelyn Caldwell stood there, aged, humbled, barely recognizable as the imperious woman who had terrorized their wedding day. Behind her stood the entire Caldwell family: Henry, Daniel, Abigail, Isabel. For the first time in 25 years, they were all together. "Nora," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. May we see our grandsons?" The hospital room fell silent. Ethan appeared at Nora's shoulder, his protective instincts flaring, but Nora saw something in Evelyn's eyes she'd never seen before: genuine remorse. "Why now?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully controlled. Evelyn's composure cracked completely. "Because we were wrong about everything about you, about Nora, about what love really means." Tears streamed down her wrinkled face. "I've spent 25 years in hell, knowing I chose pride over my son's happiness." Daniel stepped forward, no longer the arrogant golden child. "My marriage nearly failed 2 years ago. It was Nora's counseling program that saved us. The woman we rejected became our salvation." "I've watched you both from afar," Abigail added softly. "Watched you build something beautiful while we nursed our bitterness. You've helped hundreds of families while we couldn't even heal our own." Henry, the proud patriarch who had once disinherited his son, spoke last. "You became the man I always hoped you'd be, Ethan." And Nora, his voice broke. "You became the daughter I was too blind and stubborn to see." Nora looked at each face, seeing genuine anguish where once there had been only cruelty. Years of counseling broken families had taught her to recognize authentic remorse. "I forgive you," she said simply. "All of you." Evelyn collapsed into sobs. May I hold him, my grandson?" Ethan nodded slowly. Nora carefully placed Jeremiah in his grandmother's trembling arms. Evelyn Caldwell, who had once declared that Nora's womb would reject life, held her grandson and wept with 25 years of suppressed love. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "They both are. Nora, I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for the pain I caused you. You took our past," Ethan said quietly, "but you couldn't destroy our future." The reconciliation wasn't immediate magic. Too much damage had been done for instant healing, but it was the beginning of something unprecedented: genuine accountability, authentic change, and the slow rebuilding of relationships on foundations of mutual respect. Over the following months, Evelyn attended family therapy sessions. The Caldwell family fortune was redirected toward literacy programs and marriage counseling initiatives. Henry established an endowment, ensuring their work would continue for generations. Most powerfully, every Sunday afternoon, their house filled with extended family spanning 3 generations. Javier and Sofia played with baby cousins while Isabel taught her grandmother about immigration law. Abigail learned to change diapers with the patience she'd never shown as a young mother. Ethan and Nora, now in their 50s, moved through their home with the quiet satisfaction of people who had fought for love and won. Jeremiah and Samuel grew surrounded by siblings who adored them, grandparents who treasured them, and parents who understood these boys, represented love's ultimate triumph over hatred. "Look what we built," Nora said one evening, watching 3 generations create the kind of joy that transforms everyone it touches. "We built forever," Ethan replied, pulling her close. "We built love that was stronger than everything they threw at us." 25 years after a society wedding nearly destroyed by family cruelty, Ethan and Nora Caldwell stood victorious not because they had defeated their enemies, but because they had transformed them, not because they had avoided suffering, but because they had chosen to let their pain create compassion rather than bitterness. Love had won. Love always wins in the laughter of their twin sons, in the healing of their broken family, and in the hundreds of couples who had learned from their example how to build relationships that could weather any storm. Their victory would echo through generations.